William Blake's best illustrated book was never intended for publication, and it remained largely unknown until 1972. Having worked in rare books for 25 years, I completely understand why William Blake's illuminated books are highly sought after by collectors and quite expensive. These are the very small handmade pamphlets that he wrote, etched, printed, colored, stitched, and sold, hand-sold to collectors rather than to booksellers, by himself with help from his wife in very small quantities. And that is what makes them rare and a big part of what makes them desirable. Blake trained as an engraver, and he aspired to be an artist. He much more so than a poet. All of his friends were illustrators, engravers, and printers, rather than the literati of the day. He was also a creative genius and a prophet, and possibly a touch mad. He couldn't be confined to being just an engraver or just an artist or just a poet. He had tried to set himself up in business as a printer, so he had the necessary equipment and all of the training to put himself in the fairly unique position of being able to develop a process by which he could craft and produce these small books of his prophetic poems from conception to final product. You know, I could appreciate their beauty, I could appreciate the craft that went into it, I could appreciate the genius behind it, but the books themselves always left me a little cold until I came to Blake's illustrations for Gray's poems. Now, this was a book that he never intended for publication. This was a book that his friend, John Flaxman, also a printer and illustrator, had commissioned him to do as a gift for Flaxman's wife, who presumably was also a friend of Blake's. So this project was really a way to throw Blake a bone and kind of give him some work, give him some money. Flaxman paid him for it. And also, I think, to give him some consolation, because Blake had just experienced a real severe disappointment. In 1795, he started work on illustrating Edward Young's very beloved and famous poem at that time called Night Thoughts. And Blake drew, painted 537 watercolor illustrations for this long poem. And one volume was produced. It took 43 of those illustrations and engraved them in black and white. You can find copies that have been hand-colored after, but the printing was done in black and white. 43 of those 537 were done, produced in this one volume that was going to be the first of 4, where more would come out. But after that first volume, the publisher went out of business. So that left Blake's project completely hung, and no more of it was ever seen, was ever published. You can find reproductions like this of his illustrations to Night Thoughts. But, you know, Blake was devastated by this. And so I think Flaxman was giving him this commission as a way to kind of console him for that as well. And so what Blake did was he took Gray's poems, he took the pages, and each page he cut out of a copy of Gray's poems. Thomas Gray was an 18th century poet. He was dead at this time, but also a beloved poet from that time period. Most famous now for his elegy, wrote in a country churchyard. But what Blake did was he took each page and pasted it onto a larger folio sheet. And then in the margins around the letterpress, he painted watercolor illustrations. Because there was never an idea that this would ever be published, he didn't have to make sure that these illustrations would be easy to engrave or, you know, easy to translate to a copper plate. He could just paint and let his fancy fly free, and he really does for a lot of these pages, and I think they are some of his just most beautiful and most striking, most dramatic images, and he's known for beautiful and striking and dramatic, and I think this book really is, to my mind at least, really kind of sold me on Blake as an artist, on Blake as a genius. And in particular, Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat is very successful. It's a very short poem, and I'll just, I think there are 7 or 8 pages, I'll read that to you. Trigger warning, this does involve the death of a cat, unfortunately. Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat, Drowned in a Tub of Goldfishes, by Thomas Gray. 'Twas on a lofty vase's side, where China's gayest art had dyed the azure flowers that blow. Demurest of the tabby kind, the pensive Selima reclined, gazed on the lake below. Her conscious tale her joy declared, the fair round face, the snowy beard, the velvet of her paws. Her coat, that with the tortoise vies, her ears of jet, and emerald eyes, she saw and purred applause. Still had she gazed, but midst the tide 2 angel forms were seen to glide, the genii of the stream. Their scaly armor's Tyrian hue, through richest purple to the view, betrayed a golden gleam. The hapless nymph with wonder saw, a whisker first, and then a claw, with many an ardent wish she stretched in vain to reach the prize. What female heart can gold despise? What cat's averse to fish? Presumptuous maid, with looks intent, again she stretched, again she bent, nor knew the gulf between. Malignant fate sat by, and smiled. The slippery verge her feet beguiled, she tumbled headlong in. 8 times emerging from the flood, she mewed to every watery god some speedy aid to send. No dolphin came, no nereid stirred, nor cruel Tom nor Susan heard. A favorite has no friend. From hence, ye beauties, undeceived, know, one false step is ne'er retrieved, and be with caution bold. Not all that tempts your wandering eyes and heedless hearts is lawful prize, nor all that glisters gold. It may have helped that these were Gray's poems that he was trying to illustrate and not his own. That may have given him a little bit more perspective on the material, a little more distance, and allowed him to really just express himself and have fun with it. That's the thing that comes across to me in this book. Even some of the darker poems, like Descent of Odin, which is an Old Norse translation, a translation from Old Norse, about a knight's journey to hell, basically, and to consult the oracle. And it's pretty dark, and the images are kind of dark as well, but it still is just a lot of fun. So that's why this is my, when I say it's the best Blake illustrated book, I'm especially referring to the books of other people that he illustrated, as opposed to the illuminated books where he's taking his own words and setting them among his own illustrations. I think that's a different category. And in that category, I think Songs of Innocence and Experience is unparalleled, of course. But so after the Flaxmans died, Blake made this book, 116 leaves, illustrated in this way, and John Flaxman gave it to his wife. She apparently was kind of stingy about who she would show it to, possibly to preserve it, but it was not seen by many people. And then when they died, their estate went to auction, and from that auction, it went into the collection of William Beckford, the author of Vathek, an heir to a sugar fortune, and he was a renowned book collector from that time period. I'd like to do a video about him, about Vathek as well. But he was a renowned collector from that period. This book made its way into his collection, and there it sat, and from there it went to the Duke of Hamilton's collection. Beckford's second daughter married the 10th Duke of Hamilton, and so it went into the Hamilton's estate. There was a very large auction of Hamilton material in 1882. This did not make it into that auction, probably just slipped through the cracks. Alexander Gilchrist, who was Blake's biographer in the 19th century, in his 1863 Life of Blake, he noted the existence of this thing, but he had not seen it. And it wasn't until the destruction of Hamilton's palace in the dismantling of it in 1919 that it was seen by Herbert Grierson and recognized and taken out. And even then, it wasn't until 1972 when the Trianon Press, a fine press sponsored by the William Blake Trust, who was involved in reproducing a lot of these Blake illuminated and illustrated books in facsimile, the Trianon Press in 1972 released its extremely faithful facsimile edition in the original size, which is a large folio. They printed very faithful copies of each page using stencils, apparently, and some pages would require up to 42 stencils, 25 different colors being printed at using these stencils at different times, getting it down to the details of Blake's own little penciled notes on some of these pages. The paper is their best attempt to recreate the paper that was used. Apparently, 18 people employed at the press it took them 4 years to produce this book. They made 518 copies of it, and it cost in 1972 £530, which through Google or internet calculators say would be about $7,900 today. And actually, now you can find it. You can find this book for quite a bit less online. I've seen copies for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. So, considering that it cost £530 in 1972, it actually has lost a little bit of value. Could be undervalued at this point. That I don't know. I don't own a copy myself. I have I've handled it though and made some pictures of it when I saw it, and that's why I wanted to make this video, just to bring it to you. Hopefully you will get as much of a kick out of it as I did. Again, these aren't all of the images, just some of the ones that I found most striking. The Elegy, which is Gray's most famous poem, I think the illustrations for Blake's illustrations to that particular poem were some of they were just a little boring, a little static to my taste, but probably suitable for an elegy. Anyway, these illustrations just made me a Blake fan, and my hope is that they'll do the same for you if you aren't already. Or if you are already, maybe it's something by Blake that you haven't seen before.